When Hamas on October 7 went into Israel to attack the people that they hated, the way they treated them, part of that was defended with Islamic scripture or with the Islamist ideology. So it is no secret at all to any of our Western leaders, regardless of where that leader, moral leadership, political leadership, scholarship, any kind, it's absolutely clear to us what radical Islam entails. But somehow we can't get ourselves disconnected from this idea of atoning for our past sins. Where are we on the threat of radical political Islam? I think we're in a worse place today than we were in 2001. We've spent trillions of dollars and a lot of blood. And I think I'm coming to the conclusion, what is wrong with our Western leaders? Do we have some kind of curse on us that prevents us from seeing the determination of the radical political Islamists who want to spread their message, which ultimately is the establishment of an Islamic state based on Sharia law? So initially, with 2001, the news broke with those Islamists who wanted to accomplish the objective of establishing an Islamic state through violence. We took passenger planes, they knocked down the Twin Towers, they were on their way to knocking down the White House, and they managed to knock a wing of the Pentagon, and they didn't want to stop this. They wanted to use jihad as a means of shock and awe. We, I think, got trapped by, if you remember it, you're probably too young to remember that, but it was quite spectacular and it was history-changing. And the reaction from the United States and the rest of the West was to meet them with force. Because of the military supremacy of the United States of America, the rest of the West, it was relatively easy to subdue and eliminate the structures of al-Qaeda, to bring down Osama bin Laden as their leader. And when out of that group, a new group, through al-Zarqawi, the Islamic State emerged and hijacked territory, captured territory in Iraq and Syria, we did the same thing again. We were confronted with this determination of these groups to use brutal force, and they were met with military deterrence. They were removed. There is no structure called the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria anymore. But what over the years we have failed to see is the other side, the Dawah side. So not the jihadists, but within the Islamist political groups, there is the, in my view, much stronger, more insidious, more sinister group, which tries to expand and reach that objective of establishing an Islamic state through Dawah. And Dawah is basically the plan. It is to bring Muslims, those people who identify as Muslim, to transform them from just religious people, people who identify with the faith, but who are not political, into political tools for the objective. And then take it one step further and convert non-Muslims. And on top of that, to Islamize institutions. It's a long-term plan. It's gradual. There is a hybrid form. There are some people within the Islamist circles who say we should use the gradualist means, and then when the opportunity is right, we should use force. So all of these three flavors, if you will, of Islamizing society or working towards this objective of a Sharia-based society, be it local, regional, or global, they exist, they're expanding, and we are standing by and watching this happen in traditionally non-Muslim territories, in traditionally Christian or Judeo-Christian societies. We've seen them make attempts like this in India. Again, watch the pushback there. In China, the way the Chinese government is dealing with Islamist sedition is absolutely abhorrent. And that is something we in the West can only condemn. We do not want to take our Muslim communities and put them in camps and enslave them, torture them, rape them, sterilize them. These are against every principle we believe in. Looking at that extreme of what the Chinese Communist Party is doing to the Uyghurs, and then looking at the other side of, when the Islamists use violence, we're going to go after those individuals who use violence in their organizations and put that down, but do nothing else about the spread of the ideology. I think we have opened ourselves up for the establishment of a huge infrastructure of Dawah. And so it's like a cancer. The Islamist message and the agents of Dawah, the Islamists who are pushing it, are in our education system. They have their own schools and Islamic centers and mosques and madrasas. They've now infiltrated universities. They are in political parties. And so through perfectly peaceful and legal means, they have established themselves. And here we are sitting back and watching this. And I think one of the most shocking things you see today in 2024 on our streets is this chanting of genocidal slogans at Jewish communities in Europe, in the United States, in Britain, in France, in Germany. For the Jewish community today, it feels like it's the 1930s. And this is Islamist-driven anti-Jewish propaganda. And so I find when I first came in here, I said, oh goodness, I'm being mic'd up again to talk about the same things I was talking about, in 2001. Don't we ever learn? My first experience on camera was in the Netherlands. It was a program called Rondom Teen, where there was 2 long benches full of members of the audience who speak. And there were young jihadi men snarling at me. And back then, my friend Naima Tahir, who I think is still in the Netherlands. And she and I were educated in the Netherlands. Our backgrounds were Muslim, and we had come to accept and admire the principles and the values of the country we lived in. And we were there sitting and defending them. And these guys were really snarling at us. And I look back to that moment, which she and I were talking about. And over time, many other ex-Muslims and peaceful Muslims have joined us. And it's the same thing. And the problem is just getting bigger and bigger.
To what extent have our policies on mass immigration contributed to where we are? Or is it more that when people do come, we fail to integrate them, assimilate? Like, how are we here?
So in my experience, again, to go back to those, for me, early days when I started to participate in this debate and say, look, here's what the threat is and what it looks like. The first obstacle, I think, to a broader insight was the members of the elite, politicians, academics, journalists, who said, poor thing, you traumatized little girl from Somalia, you don't understand, we're this open society, so we're going to approach this the way we've been doing things for a good long time. We the sophisticated lot. And that was through consensus. Prevailing philosophy at the time was multiculturalism. And so the idea was if we give a little, they will give a little. And together we will go through this where they adapt and we adapt, and we establish these beautiful multicultural societies. Immigration was a part of that debate, where as we were having those conversations all over Europe, it was, assuming that this multiculturalist consensus building, bridge building, sophisticated, wonderful way would work, would be, just from a rational perspective, just from a numbers perspective, wouldn't it be practical to stop immigration, integrate or assimilate? As the word assimilation wasn't used, it was integrate. Assimilation was considered to be an insult to the Muslims and to the immigrants. It had to come from both ways. In any case, why don't we take the lot who are already here, get to that utopia of multiculturalism, and then slowly you could talk about having more immigrants coming. But that's not what in the end happened. What in the end happened was those who had come and their children who had been radicalized in this Dawah infrastructure, the mosques and the madrasas and in Europe, they continued to broaden their parallel society. I don't know how else to describe it. They have sort of Sharia-light ghettos. Those were allowed to thrive. But at the same time, the borders were also flung open through the asylum and refugee system. So now you have the opposite of what was the desired outcome, which is a group of mainly imams and other radical Islamist elites who have captured the hearts and minds of Muslim immigrants and their children, who are saying, do not integrate, do not assimilate, reject the values of the host country. And then everyone who comes in, they're the ones in town, they're the ones who bring them into the mosques and radicalize them. So you have this paradox where there are refugees from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Sudan, Somalia, were not at all Islamist. They're fleeing war-torn countries, war-torn because of Sharia, by the way, and they come into the UK, France, Sweden, Germany, etc. And that is where they are taught to become, through Dawah, to become radical Islamists.
Ayaan, and do you think part of the problem here is that Islamism is so different from the way Western people see the world that we really can't understand it. And as a result of not being able to understand it, we can't comprehend and intellectualize the dangers that it poses.
The answer is yes and no. I think we have an experience in Western Europe and in America with the intolerance or the rise of intolerant ideas, talking about National Socialism, for instance, and the ideas in America that were used to defend the institution of slavery and segregation. We've come to see that those were absolutely horrible, abhorrent ideas, and we've rejected them. And part of showing that we are atoning for the past is to the way we deal with radical political Islam. We recognize it for what it is. There is plenty of scholarship now in every country to show that radical political Islam is totalitarian. It is anti-human, it's anti-freedom, it's anti-woman, it's anti-Jewish, it's homophobic. And they show us over and over again. You know, when the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria was established, they proceeded actually to carry out what it would be like to live in an Islamic state. So we know that. We know it not only through scholarship, but also what they readily show us. When Hamas on October 7 went into Israel to attack the people that they hated, the way they treated them, part of that was defended with Islamic scripture or with the Islamist ideology. So it is no secret at all to any of our Western leaders, regardless of where that leader, moral leadership, political leadership, scholarship, any kind, it's absolutely clear to us what radical Islam entails. But somehow we can't get ourselves disconnected from this idea of atoning for our past sins, the sins of slavery, of colonialism, of causing the Holocaust. And now here we are. I remember a conversation I used to have openly with the mayor of Amsterdam, where he plainly said, we should not treat Muslim minorities in Holland the way the Jews were treated in the 1930s. There is this constant reference, and in my view, absolutely wrong reference of the totalitarian, terrible ideologies of Europe and America, to say the only way to atone for it is to give a free pass to this new totalitarian ideology. By the way, Islamism is not, it's not like, you know, the Jews who were persecuted in the 30s. There was never a Jewish empire. Jews never held slaves. There were Islamic empires who held slaves and who segregated people and who continue to do that. And yet somehow we find ourselves inhibited, frigid when it comes to seeing this problem and dealing with it appropriately while we still have time. And while there are still, you know, we have options that are open to us.
Why do you think it is that we're so reticent about talking about this problem and then actually dealing with it and tackling it head on?
So what I can report to you is I was a politician actually operating within a proper liberal democracy and a parliament within in that context. And if I give you an aggregation of all the arguments, every person on either side, we don't have one aisle with two sides in Holland. If we had several parties, it's the proportional representation system, so it's a bit more crowded. But all of them were saying, look, we have a constitution, and this constitution guarantees the following things. It guarantees the freedom of religion, the freedom of association, the freedom of speech. We have schools, religious schools in the Netherlands paid for by the government. And so if an Islamist wants to open a school to indoctrinate, we know he's going to program children with the totalitarian ideology of Islamism. He gets not only a license to open this school, but he also gets money. So we knew all of these things, and we can't stop it because our laws forbid us from doing anything other than if they cross over to the line of violence, then we will go and pick those individuals up, we'll surveil them. If possible, we'll bring them to court. There's really not much else we can do. In which case, these constitutions, they sort of turn into, you know, what one American scholar right after 9/11 called the Constitution is seen as a suicide pact.